After this wonderful talk about basically the relation between science and society, we now have a panel specifically on that with examples. And I'm just going to jump right in. And the first speaker is Elisa Vecchione, who is at the Group of Pragmatic and Reflexive Sociology at the School of Advanced Studies in Social Science in Paris, but at the moment is related to UCL and the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And she will talk about something very much related to what we just saw, contesting uncertainties. So, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Yeah, you said it right. After this wonderful talk, I have a big task to keep you interested in what comes next. So I really hope I will do that. So by shutting down my mind, thinking about what you're just saying, because it's already like filling my brain. So you can see from the title that I'm already quite aggressive. I talked about contestation, right? I don't think I'm a very aggressive person, but I try to fight a little bit. And why am I using these words? Why I'm talking about uncertainty rather than science? Why I'm talking about scientists and the public, and I forget the policymakers? So just to be clear, contestation, for the way I intend it, is the engine of democratic representation. So if you think about democracy as a structure fundamentally made up of a majority and a minority, in which the minority should always be preserved and given the possibility to contest what the majority says in order to keep democracy healthy, then you can understand that there is a kind of mechanism that must be kept alive within democratic society. And that leads to a very interesting theory of democratic representation. I forgot representation, sorry about that. It's a diarchy between will and judgment. What does that mean? So this is Nadia Urbinati from Columbia University. She's a political scientist. And she says something very clear. Democracy is not just about grasping or capturing the public will, as in the tradition of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It is also about having, providing the matter for this public to contest, to have its own opinion, to judge and contest. And when this mechanism is failing for whatever reason, then we have a problem. And she very much based her own argument what is happening, especially in Italy, but also in the United States, even with Barack Obama for some reasons. So now, talking about democratic representation, my question is, how is the representation performed? Who is representing what and how? We have scientists that have been using models for centuries, and today even with computer modeling, their representational capacity in terms of representing the future is even more powerful than it was before. But also we should have representation by policymakers, right? That's the idea of democratic representation. And the question sometimes that I ask myself is where they are in producing what are called social imaginaries of society. It seems to me that this representational task is very much delegated more or less unconsciously to science, and that's where we have a problem, and that's where actually science should try to reflect a little bit more about. So what I'm trying to do with this presentation is to actually find a new line of inquiry to improve at the same time the quality of science and the quality of democracy. I think that the two cannot be disconnected at all for the kind of introduction I made. And the question I'm going to ask is whether narrative can be thought of as the basis for a scientific method. So here I'm really concerned about the fate of democracy with our capacity to think of a new epistemology about science, and especially for what I'm going to do, but the science applied to modeling of climate change, integrated assessment modeling. So once more, I'm sorry talking about climate change, especially after what Andrea said yesterday, which is a very important point about having scientists betting on these issues and putting all their authority and credibility on that. But climate change, it's an interesting case because somehow it represents a kind of very strict problem of this classical paradigm of rationality applied to science policy interface, in which we are obsessed with getting probabilities right and performing this kind of cultural prediction that science should do. So just to be brief, integrated assessment modeling works precisely at the interface between science and policy. They are done for being used by policymakers. Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry. And briefly said, they are a general category of computer models describing interaction between human activities, the atmosphere, and natural ecosystem. And those are, let's say, the main task of the IPCC. Why modeling? I already introduced that. Models are an integral part of science, and by representing a targeted system, models allow us to discover features of the phenomena they stand for. Now, there are different ways they can represent the system, and this is a very interesting philosophical question, but I have no time to go deep into that. But what I really think is that computer modeling is really exacerbating what I call the PNS character of science. That is the fact that there is an inadequacy of using probabilistic measures of the future.
Hola, 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 hola.
Hola.
Not the conference, yes.
So I'm talking.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry.
Silvio Funtovic.
All right. Please stick with me. I will try not to stop myself because I am the main problem, I think, in this situation. So as I was saying, computer model exacerbates somehow the PNS character of science. Among others, the inadequacy of probabilistic measures of future events and the need to think in terms of complex system. Why, sorry. And this leads me to even zooming into a specific kind of modeling that is the production of scenarios. Because in this exacerbation that modeling creates of the PNS character of science, uncertainty is really what becomes central in the whole discussion. And why it does become central is because it is strictly connected to the way we shape the future. Generally we think, and I can tell you I've been studying a lot of welfare economics and economic modeling, even though just the language, I will never be able to do an economic model. The main idea is that the present and the future are somehow separated by a space that is a space of uncertainty which you want to reduce, and that's what is, for instance, the discount rate does in economic modeling, right? In order to make present and future comparable. And the idea is to do that through a straight line that is in an unequivocal manner. But the reality is much more complicated. You have many different futures, right? And especially you have very different way of getting to those future. Those are just, of course, simplification of the thing because as somebody was saying, scenarios are more incremental than these lines can show. So, what's the problem in this misuse of uncertainty that I see in modeling? Is that we tend to forget the models, so integrated assessment model can only provide answers that are as good as the assumptions that underline them and the structural fidelity they exhibit. So this means that if we don't reflect on the assumption of this modeling, we are just not making a scientific exercise. And uncertainty, in fact, structures scenarios, but at the same time is the greatest problem. And this is a very much policy problem. When we talk about the problem of uncertainty is a problem of discomfort. Uncertainty creates an open up of possible way of thinking about the future that is very much difficult then to handle. And the question is how do we work with that? When I say that uncertainty is so key to the internal consistency of scenario is because simply this is a very simple diagram that a very dear colleague of mine, a mathematician, was doing for me, representing different set of trajectories of possible futures. And what I want to focus on here is simply that scenario folds the known patterns with the unknown pattern in their own distinctive way. This is a very specific process. The distinctive way consists of the way uncertainty is treated to give the scenario a certain coherence. Okay, so this is the main ingredient that we should look at. And this coherence is created through two processes. One, by constructing a story that has a beginning and an end. And two, by building each sequence of the events. Okay, and we have to always keep in mind these two elements that sometimes don't appear so clear. And the red errors that you see coming from the bottom are actually what I call points of uncertainties, okay? From one step to the other, you always have a junction point that is given by uncertainty in which the model makes a choice of the next steps it wants to make toward a certain future. And this is not me saying there are very eminent economists that say that, so I'm wondering whether I'm more or less unconscious of the implication of what they're saying. But with a little bit more of precision, how does scenario making work? There is a problem of plausibility, and that's why I take it out. I would rather stick to the internal coherence. So scenarios are defined as description of how the future might develop based on a coherent and internally consistent set of assumptions about the key relationship and driving forces under analysis. So this is the IPCC definition of scenarios. That is also one of quantitative narratives. So I want to really stress on the importance of taking narrative seriously in the way we construct scenarios, and that's what I'm trying to do. The fact that scenarios can be narrativized, as I was saying, is part of the IPCC cultures, and they are using this term officially. But the question is, who constructs storylines? The storyteller, I would say. But actually here we are talking about the modeler, right? Which is actually a storyteller. Why is the modeler a storyteller? For me, and I think that this can create new ways of thinking about scenario. I think that the best person describing the modeler as a storyteller, even though that was not his own initial idea, is Aidan White. Aidan White is a philosopher and historiographer that recently died. He was Professor Emeritus of the History of Consciousness at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and also Professor of Comparative Literature at Stanford University. And he wrote, is majorly known for his meta-history, which is a very famous book about historical imagination in the 19th century's Europe. But for today, I'm going to mainly focus on the content and the form, which is another contribution of him from 1987, and it's really about a theory of narrative. So simply what I'm trying to do is to think about I will skip this just because I don't have time, about thinking about complexity science as an historical science. Again, this is not me saying that, but somebody else, Buchanan with his book on ubiquity. So the main idea is that we have models that applies to complex system, and complex system have one main feature. They never can be predictable, but it can always be retrodictable or reproducible. And that's something very, very important. It seems that we forget to use the retrospection power, that is a typical power of historians to reconstruct the past to get to the present in modeling. So that's what I'm trying to do. And when I say that you have a retrospection, that's what I mean. You can always, starting from the outcome scenario, go back from the end of the story to the beginning. So, and again, by focusing on the points of uncertainty. To present A very quickly, his idea is that, and that's where I think is very important, he brings value in the way history is constructed, okay? The historian is a storyteller endowing past events with a sense. And I'm thinking, is this something that we are doing when we do models? Indeed, all histories are stories for this reason. And this sense derives from the fact that the storyteller makes the story end. When the story ends, you have a morality. And I think that this is exactly a kind of research that we never use in science. In order, I think within the scientific community, to discuss about what we care about, why we care about, what our values, and I think that Melanie was precisely explaining that in better words. So the way the story ends, and this is a very important point, derives from the consciousness of the storyteller about the present moment. So by building values in the way you reconstruct the story, you actually become conscious about your present moment. Okay, and that's something, again, that I think is extremely valuable in the way we put models. So I will maybe reply to some of your questions later about this history-story connection. But the main point that I want to make is that this consciousness is very important to understand what kind of situation you are in terms of laws, in terms of authority, in terms of the moment, the present moment you are working on. And that's where I think contestation can come from. We miss, or we are deprived from, a kind of referent that we can use as contestation, because this imagination about the future is so prolific, but at the same time is so confusing. Another point about the use of narratives is really that narratives have a power that other kind of discursive practices don't have. They can really bring people together in a way and understand each other, even though we don't live the same life or we don't do the same thing. And that's where narratives are very much related for me to the work of co-production and problem tractability. So I will have to skip. I'm really sorry. But I'm going to explain through this. So why Aid and why matters for the way you can apply to this to scenario assessment. It matters because you can think about, again, our old diagram as a box of different trajectories that actually provides us with a space of negotiation of public meaning, what Wynne was talking about, actually, and also the space in which public reason can be formed. How you do this? Well, you start from what you at least don't want to happen. So you always use the outcome of scenario as a counterfactual, okay? And you stabilize it by saying which one you don't want to happen. And this is a matter of deliberation. Okay, it's not something that is a priori set. Then you can always go backward and understand, okay, how do I get there? And how do I don't want to get there? And at each time, you actually use retrospection in order to get to the initial moment of the story. And you select the moments of uncertainty in which actually something can make the difference and lead us to what we don't want to do. And that's where you actually shift from retrospection to introspection. And you use uncertainties as points of deliberation. Are we going to go there or not? Because that probably will lead that. And the usefulness of this diagram, I think, is that at each time, of course, the time passes, right? So what you want to do is to change the space of negotiation, because that depends on new knowledge you might have, on changing preferences of the public, and especially of the way values may change around society. So JJ, this is a very theoretical framework, but I think it can be opened up for better application to things that you have been doing on the ground. So I would really like to hear your own vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. This was really interesting. I'm sorry you had to skip so much. The next one is Ismael Ràfols from the Polytechnical University of Valencia and the Center of Science Technology Study at the University of Leiden. And he's talking about the indicators for opening up science and how to do that.
Okay, I think I will also stand up if there is the micro. No?
Is there a microphone?
Can you hear me? Yeah?
There will be.
Okay. Good. So I'm a bibliometrician, I have to confess that. I'm part of the the group of people who are churning out these indicators which are then applied to the research system. Should I speak louder? Yeah. With potentially problematic consequences. And in recent years we have been trying to reflect on how we could improve the type of indicators that are provided in research evaluation. And well, I thought that the way post-normal science is framing debates about numerical evidence could be helpful. This is the attempts we are making, and I'd be very grateful of hearing and learning from post-normal science. So the argument that I'm making is that, so there's usually the argument, I should say actually, that a lot of the research of the presentation here is based on Andy Sterling framework of opening up, which he uses for issues of sustainability or energy research. And this is applied to research evaluation as scientific advice, which is sort of a bit of a meta. So on the one hand, we see that indicator-based evaluation is presented often as one of the drivers of the crisis of science. And then the argument goes, okay, well, indicators are a form of scientific evidence for policy. Only it's science policy, which makes it a bit recursive. Do they help get the right decisions? Possibly not that often. What are the performative effects? And then there is all this literature about increasing number of useless publications, publications of certain types of evidence rather than others. So they're performative effects. And then I'm going to skip all this part. I think actually in some of Andreas and Samuel's papers this is discussed. I'm going straight into, well, how there is a very strong demand in policy for indicators, and this is not going away. So the idea is, how can we provide quantitative evidence that can be replacing the narrow focus of current indicators? And we propose there are these 3 steps, or 3 points of entry. What we see at the moment is the emphasis on having more indicators. And this is the push for all-metric data, indicators of societal impact and the like. This broadening out, looking at different types of indicators rather than just number of citations. Yep. Now we say this is what in Andy Sterling's framework is called broadening out, rather than focusing only in the publications of outcomes, looking at different aspects of the research process. Yep. But we think that these, counting number of times that papers are mentioned in policy would not solve the problem of the closing down effect, and that what we would need is a different way of providing evidence, and this is where we don't know how to go about, and discussions from post-normal science might be useful, which is how to provide quantitative evidence then, rather than closing down the options, actually pluralizes the type of options discussed when making decisions. So this is what I'm going to discuss today. There is another step, which is the actual policy process in which then indicators are discussed, which I will not talk about today, but which we are working at the moment. And this last week, there's this paper called Indicators in the Wild, meaning outside, out in the world. This is Calonne's Research in the Wild, so metaphor, which is, so it's now available in research evaluation and also in green repositories. Well, and actually, I have to say, as a Catalan citizen working on this type of issues, where we take for granted that you are discussing in conditions of freedom of speech and equality for all types of decisions, has become really challenging. When we have 9 people in prison at the moment, we have our president in exile, the vice president in prison, the minister of foreign affairs is in prison. And this happens in the city you're working with. This beautiful European city everybody loves and everybody comes is a place where some people can be accused of terrorism because of blocking a road or stopping a train. It's not, and this is not appearing either in the European news, and unlike Brexit, I see that most academics sort of look up at the air because academics are cosmopolitan citizens and take cosmopolitanism as universalism. You know that whereas cosmopolitanism is about being able to be aware of the many local differences all over the cosmos, not about holding universal laws. So it's something that I've actually been find quite hard to engage with the democracy debate in a moment in which, as a citizen, some of our basic freedoms are being suppressed. But anyway, so let me go on. So the assumption is that there's pressing, I'm going to be quite pragmatic, so I take for granted that yes, there are pressing demands that in research management and that indicators can help in making decisions because they increase transparency, reduce complexity, reduce times and cost. And we have to acknowledge that in terms of pragmatic policy, that is useful. I think Melanie was mentioning before that the need to come down to decisions. There is a program of science policy in the US, which sort of brings about this dream of applying scientific methods, but do they lead to the right decisions? And I think there is an awareness that decisions based on current scientific indicators are extremely problematic. They are biased in terms of favoring certain fields over others. So field research might be suppressed, applied research might be suppressed. Some social science and humanities are not well valued by the indicators. Peripheral countries are also below the radar in many of the indicators. Non-English publications are below the radar. So many topics outside of mainstream will not appear as doing well according to this indicator. So how can we pluralize the debate? And the idea is that we want to go from the type of evidence which is rankings towards a type of evidence which is plural and conditional. And if you have read some of Andy Sterling's work, you might recognize this, this moving from the unique and prescriptive advice to the plural and conditional advice. And the question is, how do we do this? So the framework is the use of indicators in policy appraisal, where we distinguish these two dimensions, breadth versus openness. The breadth being the extent to which you cover diverse dimensions of knowledge. The openness, it's about the outputs. So to which degree there are an array of options being given to the decision makers as possible. So you can put this in these two axes and then think that different types of social science methods would tend to fall, and this is not a unique position, but you know, they would tend to fall in certain areas. Now the claim is that most conventional science and technology indicators are in that corner. We only take publications and then we only take citations. And what's the effect? These are tools to close down the debate. Now the proposal, and what we are seeing now in policy is a move towards broadening out. You know, there's the demand for social impact indicators. But then what do we have? We have patterns, we have number of tweets, but it's in this way you can have this broadening out, more forms of evidence, but nevertheless, if you end up with just one ranking, you end up having also a closing down effect. In the case of university rankings, you have different dimensions, but then the ranking is still there. In the European Innovation Scoreboard, you have 25 dimensions, but they are aggregated in one composite indicator, which tells which are the good innovators and the bad innovators. The question is how we go towards the right-hand side, towards the opening up. Now, I'm going to explain now the type of experiments we are making, and I'll be glad to hear also other suggestions of what we could be making. The first one, it's very easy. In case that you have different dimensions, as it is the case of the European Innovation Scoreboard, by building radar charts, you're already presenting the different dimensions. So in the case in which you have different dimensions, radar charts, which can be simplified to 3 or 4 dimensions instead of 15, are already a way of doing the opening up. But in the case in which you only have one, the question is also, when we have a narrow range of appraisal, can we still do the opening up? And I claim that you can still do that. For example, if you have indicators of scientific excellence, one way to go about is to present the different types of scientific excellence indicators that we have. And if you actually do the study, you will see, and this is so a study that we published, we compared different types of business and management in schools, some of them doing innovation studies, and what you see is that a type of journal ranking, impact factor, a type of citation-based normalization, a different type of citation-based normalization based on the citing site, rather than the citing site, well, that's technical, but you come up with rankings that are not compatible. So just showing contrasting views based on different assumptions will show that these indicators are not robust. Another way that we've been trying to do is taking qualities or properties which are of interest, for example, interdisciplinarity, which in places like the European Research Council are supposed to be important. And then actually what is taken as one property, if you think about it, you can see that in the policy discourse, it comprises different concepts inside. So there's issues about diversity, coherence, in between. So what you can do is split this indicator in terms of looking at, split this concept in terms of looking at diversity, that's one, and a specific property, looking in terms of what we call coherence, to which extent, so this is the spread across fields of the research. This is the extent to which there is bridging between fields, which is another of the ideas behind interdisciplinarity, or whether the research falls in between fields, which is another of the concepts behind interdisciplinarity, right, in discourse. So one same concept actually can be operationalized, one same policy discourse of interdisciplinarity can be operationalized in terms of different specific concepts, which mathematically will give, will give you different views of the property. And finally, it's the one about directions, which I'm going to skip. So to sum up, 30 seconds, we are proposing to move from these the conventional use of indicators, which in Roger Spilker's framework would be the pure scientist, to this type of owner's broker, the plural and conditional advice. And the ways we're trying to do is this by incorporating a dimension so far not taken into account, presenting contrasting perspective, multiple realizations, operationalizations of the same concepts, and then we think that there is a sort of technological possibilities thanks to issues about interactivity allowed by new visualization methods. I'll leave it here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up is Simon Meisch. He's at the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. and he will be talking about doing transformative research at IASS in Potsdam.
So, good morning. What I'm trying today is a bit of an experiment, which I'm aware could fail, but I nevertheless wanted to try it. So, in the introduction you mentioned that I'm working at the IASS since August, and my task there is to support the process of methodological self-reflection leading up to the process, or being part of the process of re-evaluation. So maybe a disclaimer before, what I'm presenting today is my personal reflections on how I want to approach this task, and not official statement, so I'm not talking official politics. This slide doesn't want to scare you away, which the talk might do, but that's not the intention of this picture. The picture gives more a bit of my motivation. Like sucking your experience and your knowledge, and which might scare you away anyway afterwards. But so I want to share my thoughts and get feedback from you about the process I'm planning. This talk is not about PNS mainstreaming in the sense of the slide. For two reasons. The IASS is too big of an institution to turn it into a coherent PNS institute like the SVT in Bern. But what I realized is that PNS is some kind of platform which is a meeting place where most of the scholars could meet at the institute. Not all would subscribe to PNS explicitly, but I think most of them could agree on basic principles of PNS. So my idea was making PNS like the platform or some kind of base for this methodology, but not like turning the IASS into SVT. That's not going to work for many reasons. Yeah. So what do I mean with I am responsible for the methodology? I will give you a background, like historical background in a minute. So basically my job description is looking at the institute, at the documents, what is there, and like reconstructing from hindsight the methodological ideas of the institute and to bring it into a coherent form, to connect it and place it within the wider field of transformative and transdisciplinary research. How does it connect to what is already there, and what is the special take or the value added of the IASS? That's more or less descriptive and a bit systematic. And my task is also to sketch possible ways of possible futures, what the IASS could be in 2030. And I should mention, it's not my task to implement or to enforce it. I'm just a thinker. So just one slide of background. Actually, it's two, but it's the slide. So the IASS was founded in 2009 by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the state of Brandenburg, which is the region around Berlin. And that's why it's located in Potsdam, and several science organizations such as the Humboldt Institute, or I think Max Planck was involved. This impulse came from a gathering of Nobel Prize winners that met 2007 in Berlin, that called for a new science, which is not in the ivory tower and which doesn't do speaking truth to power. They passed like a Potsdam memorandum. We are standing at a moment in history when a great transformation is needed to respond to the immense threat to our planet. So there's a threat and we need a new science, and that was the impulse. Those Nobel Prize winners plus Klaus Töpfer, some might remember him, he was the head of UN environmental program for a long time, the Minister for Environmental Affairs in Germany, and he was basically the founding father of the IASS. So the aims were a new contract with society, excellent transdisciplinary transdisciplinary and transformative research, strategic dialogues with economy, politics, and society, amongst others, also like helping early career scientists and so on and so on. So basically, what with regard to the aims, it's within the mainstream of transformative research, and it calls for different research, but already from the beginning, you will find like legacies inbuilt, such as, I think there's a deficit model inbuilt, there's unreflected usage of transformation, or the transformation term. I think it's always revealing if people refer to the great transformation, implying or referring to Polanyi, for whom the great transformation was actually a quite brutal process, and leading up to fascism. And you have two of them?
Which Polanyi?
Karl Polanyi, not the other one. Yeah. So there are already inbuilt within the structure problems for transdisciplinary research. Okay, this institute was founded in 2009 and was re-evaluated in 2014 by the German Council of Science and Humanities, the Wissenschaftsrat, which is the highest advisory board of the German government on science affairs. And they recommended, amongst others, that the institute needs to make explicit its place within the transdisciplinary and transformative research landscape and make explicit the research methodology. So that's how I came into the play. So I started, I looked at documents, I talked to people, I talked to the directors, starting the process. And the first challenge was, I didn't start from scratch. There is an institute which has its past dependencies, its traditions. And so kind of the idea was to build a roof and a base. So the roof was, the methodology was meant to be inclusive. In the end, it will also serve as a benchmark to end certain projects in the end. But at the beginning, it was to be inclusive. So that's the roof. At the same time, you need to have a base from where to argue, and you can already see that there's a tension. And what I faced was how to connect different cultures and structures. On the one hand, you had many social constructivists from the SDS part especially, and realists doing like the modeling stuff and really hardcore. Then you had the critical studies, mainly from the SDS side. Then you had a hands-on transformation project who really wanted to change the world, going out and really make an impact. And then you had the basic research, people saying, no, we just investigating drivers and so on and so on. And those had to be included, and you can imagine that all of them have different ideas of what science actually is. And the IASS sees itself as a think tank, basically inviting stakeholders to discuss possible avenues of transformation. And at the same time, it sees itself as an institute for advanced studies, like an institute, I don't know if you know the famous definition of Flexner, the usefulness of useless things. So that's what an Institute for Advanced Studies does. So basically this methodology has to span over different ideas of what science is and different institutional structures. And so now we are engaged in discussions about what is, the question, is this science at all? For some of the modelers, this hands-on stuff of the, what is it? Is it activism? Is it science? Is it science at all? I don't say it's not science, I'm just giving you the discussions. And the other one, is it good science? So if you really want to do a different science, how would it look like? What would it need to be? And how would we assess it? Now we have a huge discussion about how to measure impact. And of course, they start with how many citations, how many third-party funding, and so on and so on. I'm questioning if this is the best way of measuring transformative research. So my idea was, you might remember this, this graph, or this picture from Tübingen, to have PNS as a platform which will not unite all of those people, but most of those people, by adding like a critical perspective to the hands-on people and to the realists, and like a guidance for those who do hands-on research. And my task would be to make them familiar with the concept and also to implement it in the structures. Because what I already heard was that people said, nice concept, but we are the hands-on people. We are not interested in epistemology. And then we have like the thinkers about useless things. They say, we are really interested in epistemology, but not with the hands-on stuff. And now you have to start a process where you bring those together. Then have a vision. So what is the vision of the institute? Where does it want to be? What kind of transformative research does it want to do? So how can we create a research that answers to the crisis of science and democracies and restores confidence? We've heard enough of that the last days. And how can we create research that is oriented towards the bonum commune? I always use the Latin word because it creates less resistance than the German or the English term, because then it sounds more academic. But basically, it's the common good or the Gemeinwohl, and that might sound really like an academic discourse. But now we have a hard discussion on which kind of third-party project do we want to do. I give you a purely hypothetical example, of course. Bayer Monsanto comes to you and asks you, would you like to do a project with us on the future of agriculture in 2030? What do you do? Maybe I should mention the IASS gets 7 million euros a year, so we are not really dependent on third-party funding. So we could actually do the right thing. And now, let's have this hypothetical example. What will you do? Will you say, okay, we go to the stepwise process? And yeah, exactly. Could you say it loud? Exactly. Do we take this path and change Bayer Monsanto from within? Or do we say, okay, do we want to include an environmental NGO within this process? Or do we say, no, it's a good idea to do a project on sustainable agriculture 2030 or 50, doesn't matter, it's only hypothetical. What kind of project do we need? And what would be steered towards the bonum commune? And depending on what kind of answer you give, you would have this project or not. So that's why it might sound a hypothetical, but as I said, if you want to do transformative research oriented towards the bonum commune, why wouldn't you be more experimentative and try something new? Because Bayer Monsanto doesn't need the IASS, it will find other institutions to give it like a greenwashing label. Yeah. So basically, how can we contribute to societal transformations and at the same time restore trust in democracy and science? I think that is a question to which many talks in the last days gave a partial answer or addressed it partially. That's why I think PNS would be a good platform to, under the IASS methodology. And basically the question I have now is not so much about a theory, but more about your ideas, about your experience, how to, as I said, it's not about PNS mainstreaming, but in a way it is. So what are your experience with this? So it's more like an institutional question, a structural question, and less like a theoretical question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker, Simona Cafieri, from the Italian National Institute of Statistics, will talk about measuring migrations. And I invite you to come up.
everybody. I'm Simona Cafieri, and today I speak about measuring migration. We see the new perspective by the integration of basic register, continuous census, and social survey. This flag represents the percentage of the immigrants in Italy, the percentage of all the immigrants. And now we start with some data, demographic data. We see shortly some data. We see now the share of non-national in the resident population in the year 2017. Now here we see that the highest percentage of non-national residents is in Luxembourg. But if we consider the difference between non-EU countries and non-EU countries, we see that the highest percentage is in Estonia or Latvia. But here I think there is a Russian population of non-member countries. In other countries with highest percentage of non-national in the resident population is also Germany. We have Italy and Greece. Now for now we see shortly other data about Italy. We see some figures about migration. In Italy, in 2018, we have more than 5 million resident foreigners, and the most of Romanian citizens. But a lot of non-EU foreigners had residence permits in 2018, and the largest group were Morocco, Albania, China, Ukraine, and the Philippines. But if we see the inflow by reason, we see that in 10 years the situation changed completely. Because in 2007 the work permits were higher. The percentage of work permits were very higher. But after 10 years, the percentage decreased sharply. And instead, we see that requests for asylum and other humanitarian reasons continue to grow. And the countries for origin of most of the people holding these permits for asylum and other humanitarian reasons was Nigeria, Pakistan, and Gambia. And they represent the most part of all permits issued for this reason. But this is to see. We we have to see the road toward the data integration and harmonization. We see this data because we see that the governance of immigration is only possible of shared definition, shared statistics. And we have two milestones in this about migration statistics. One in 2007 and another in 2013. This is two milestones about the harmonization process regarding the population, stock and flow. Because before EU regulation, the data what the national institution producer of data, of statistical data, is and this data is produced only if available, and this is each institution disseminates its data separately, and sometimes the lack to harmonization, and we have the data did not coincide. But after EU regulation, we have a new wave on statistics about migration, and because we have a dialogue among different institutions in the same country, and dialogue also among member states, within National Statistical Institute of different countries. And we have also the harmonization in the main statistical definition in this way. And another opportunity we have since 2011. Since 2011 we have a municipal registry list for the first time collected for 2011 census. Now we have each year we collected this municipal registry list for all the municipality, and we have a new data, and thanks to the data, thanks to this data, we can do the record linkage for the individual data for this municipal registry list, and the other data of the residence permits for the Ministry of Interior, and linking this data of municipal registry list with the data of Ministry of Interior, we this link at the beginning and at the end of the year, we can have the estimates for each municipality, also in change of citizenship and type of acquisition, previous citizenship, and this also a new opportunity for to improve statistics in member states could be offered also with the exchange of best practice of good methodologies, exchange of methodology between member states. Through this system, the statistic on migration flow will be more integrated. We have now the representation because since 2010, we have only a transmission data for Ministry of Interior at National Institute of Statistics, and we can have a foreign population balance and on aggregate data on acquisition and municipality level by sex, and only for estimation for regulation on 2007. And we have sort of data for citizen acquisition by age, sex, etc. But since 2011, by the new source of data, we have, thanks to municipality list for different years, we have a new source of data, and this record linkage allows us to identify also change in citizenship, and therefore we have estimation for better quality of the register, and we have estimation also for other needs, and we have also the data for different territory for type of acquisition, for different for marriage, residence, and choice, and different data. Then we have, better migration statistics are also linked to better statistics on usual population, resident population, that we know that in the European country, the migration flow are the main factor of change of population, because we know that in European country, birth rate is very low, and the only change is on the migration. And the very important things is this linkage allows us to build a register of usually resident population and of only official resident population, because the problem is to have data about not official population because it enrolled in register, but the problem is to have data about resident population. But we have to study to include flow and to about this link and about this study of birth, deaths, inflow and this flow and outflow. We have the application of statistical definition to administrative data. Because with the integration of administrative and survey data, we can build a lot of register. This system in this integration process is very important because the advantages are the reduces cost, reduce response burden, better quality, and we can build a register integrated system. This register integrated system is 4 registers. We have population register, business register for economic units. Another very important is for job and own activity, and also a building and building register. And this register are building for administrative sources and statistical survey. And the register have improved by statistical survey. This is the census and the social survey integrated system, because in this system we have census and administrative data and social survey for the to have a better system. Though important, the term integration is important for policy making. Is also important for the statistical, for adapting statistics to new requirement. And very important is the integration, because the integration of survey data and administrative data allows us to have also better data on migrants and their descendants. Therefore, this allows us to recording, to have a complete system about migration, complete information, because we have different sources but different information. We have to allows this allows to have and a complete system about migration. An example about that is to build a social structure through the characteristic of the group. It's very, I wouldn't be too technical and too longer, but we divide the society in 9 groups. This discriminant variable alt, where the economic, socio-economic variable, cultural, the discriminant variable are the citizenship or the household, and the occupational or non-occupational status. We see 9 groups, and is a representation of this group. The group is low-income household with foreigner, have a disadvantage on 40%, is the poorest. But the new perspective we have very important is a longitudinal approach, because by this longitudinal approach, we can make an integrated system, and linking the data about residence permits with the municipal list, also other vital events, data provided by the social security system, we can have a very important data to understand the development of migratory flow in time and space. And we have the conclusion. The conclusion is this new perspective. We have the linking records for the longitudinal analysis. We have a redesigned sample to examine for issue the traditional surveys and new surveys, and the new surveys with special attention with foreign citizens. And this is very important because better knowledge over reality allows to better politics in all EU countries.